welcome Dr. Sarah Myhill on what is the first episode of our new and brand new We Love Our Heart podcast series, because we really, after 5 years on, we want to get to the bottom of heart disease, and we want to help all those people out there who might be worried about heart disease, who might have a history of some kind of heart disease, had an event or not, want to know what to do. And I think you are possibly one of the best people to help me and many other people, many other listeners on this.
Bless you.
So, Dr. Sarah Myhill, great to be here with you. How are you?
Fine, thank you. Absolutely fine. Had a lovely day in the garden, in the gorgeous spring sunshine.
All right, getting plenty of grounding, sunshine, vitamin D. I'm sure we're going to go there as well at some point today. That's fantastic. So the first thing is, the listeners might know something a little bit about my history, and I will introduce you, but just tell me, why are we here today? What's your background? What brings you to me today, or what brings me to you even?
Well, I'm a conventionally trained doctor. I qualified in 1981. I worked for 20 years in the NHS, and I left the NHS because I realized I didn't have the clinical freedoms that I needed to be a good doctor. And conventional medicine has been increasingly usurped by big pharma, and all big pharma want to do is sell lots of drugs. And so, and drugs, of course, do not address root causes of problems. It's simply symptom suppression. So in 2000, I went independent, and so I call myself a naturopathic physician. And the only difference is I'm asking the question why. I want to know why people have their heart disease. And the fact of the matter is, heart disease is a recent phenomenon. You know, in the 1800s, early 19th century, heart disease was unheard of. There were no heart attacks. And there were some very brilliant physicians. You know, if heart disease had been an issue, it would have been picked up. So it's a phenomenon of modern life. And this illustrates the point that the starting point to prevent and treat absolutely everything, including heart disease, is to mimic the life of our distant ancestors, you know, the good bits, the diets, the micronutrient status, the freedom from toxic stress, but without the bad things. You know, I don't want, you know, a neighbouring tribe to come over and pillage my tribe. So we have security, that's good. I don't want to be cold in the winter. I like my thin, that's good. You know, I want assured food supply, that's good. So we have to pick the best of both worlds. And if we do that wisely, then we can completely prevent and reverse heart disease.
Fantastic. Great to hear that. And I stay with us for a little bit longer, listeners, because at the end, you're going to talk about my particular case of heart disease and how you, the last time we spoke, there was an incredible aha moment where I'm like, I've never heard that before. And that really makes a lot of sense to me. But before we go there, I get that all. I mean, I have had 2 heart attacks, I might have told you. And it's what became very apparent to me, and we're not anti-pharma at all or critical care, because goodness knows if I wasn't delivered to the hospital on the day of having a heart attack, who knows what would happen? I wouldn't be here. But it became apparent to me as well that I was given a cocktail of drugs when I left hospital without real explanation why. And the same kind of drugs were given to everybody, the same kind of doses, irrespective of their previous history, their body size, if you like. And this, you know, and I think this whole one size fits all was what basically set me off on a journey to, as you say, to ask why. I've nothing against taking statins per se, and all these ramipril and all these other beta blockers, but I want to know why, and I want to know, for example, what the alternative might be. And it's great to hear you talk like this, because We Love Our Heart is kind of built on a fundament that we want to just be curious. We want to be asking the questions. We want to swim a little bit upstream. I'm not the most popular person with my regular cardiologist, I have to be honest, because he always just says to me, where's the LDL? Your LDL's too high. We have to do something about this. And you know exactly. Luckily, my general physician, she's old enough to remember the time before statins. So she always says to me when she looks at my cholesterol levels, I can remember a time when that was considered normal.
Indeed.
But Dr. Sarah, let me be clear, and also to listeners, we're not here to bash big pharma. We're not, and I always say it's everybody's individual choice. If that's what you feel happy with, then fine. But we want to talk about the alternatives, and as you say, so well, the root cause and how we can address that more.
Okay. Well, the first comment I'd like to point out is that when cardiologists have conferences and go on holiday, suddenly the cardiologists are not there to treat acute cardiac events. And guess what? The mortality reduces. So I know you say, "Oh, I was rushed into hospital. I was very grateful for the cardiologist and all that for the care," but you know, what I'm trying to say is cardiologists, we think we have to go into hospital for acute myocardial infarction because that gives us a sense of security, but it doesn't necessarily reduce mortality. Sometimes the interventions can be as dangerous as the non-interventions. So there are two studies, one from America, one in Israel, where say when the cardiologists went to cardiological conferences and were not there, less interventions were done and survival was improved. So
I might just add though, Dr. Sarah, that I was unconscious at the time, so I didn't have
no choice in that.
I didn't have any choice. I woke up actually on both occasions 10 days later in the intensive care. And we could talk about whether that I certainly think for the second heart attack, I think they over exaggerated. I think there were a couple of I think they're over dramatizing the whole thing, but never mind. That's
okay. I'm interested in causation, and the point about those drugs that you detail, statins, plate blood thinners, and so on. They're not addressing root causes of. And there are two fabulous books by Malcolm Kendrick, which I'm sure you're familiar with, The Great Cholesterol Con and The Clot Thickens. The point here is that there is a kind of a perception that high cholesterol, high fat diets cause high cholesterol, which cause arterial disease. No, that is completely wrong. Cholesterol is an innocent bystander. It does not cause arterial disease. What causes arterial disease is sticky blood, high blood pressure, because high blood pressure causes turbulence within the arteries, and the turbulence damages the lining of the artery, and that then has to be repaired, and that is done by a clotting mechanism. So just like if we damage our skin, and we get what happens, the body forms a clot. It throws down platelets and fibrin to heal and repair the damage there, and then that reforms. And so arteriosclerosis results from damage to the lining of the blood vessel, and the three big causes of that are: one, sugar, which is sticky; two, turbulence, which is increased by blood pressure; and three, homocysteine, which we touched upon. And there are many other causes like inflammation, and the most pro-inflammatory thing is probably that's facing us in the modern world is probably spike protein. Heavy metals damage the lining of blood vessels. Pesticides and chemicals damage the lining of the blood vessels as well. And it's the healing repair process that involves scabs and clotting and fibrous tissue, which narrows the blood vessel, and that's what causes, drives arterial disease. But it takes decades for that damage to occur. It's decades of Western lifestyles that create that, but it can be stopped in its tracks by following evolutionary correct lifestyles. The starting point is a low.
Just want to pick up on one little thing you said there, because just to be clear, you said sugar damages the arteries. Now, isn't that the same as insulin? Insulin also damages the arteries. No,
well, it's secondary. The primary thing is when you have high blood sugar, yes, you get high insulin, because that's what the body brings, the mechanism by which the body lowers blood sugar. But if you're eating sugar all the time, you eventually get insulin resistance. And that, of course, is type 2 diabetes. But insulin doesn't damage the lining of the blood vessels. It's the sugar.
Right.
And as my Nottinghamshire patients used to say, sugar's the booger. And sugars and carbohydrates are so addictive, cheap, convenient, easy, which is why we consume them all the time. But sugar is the number one thing, and that's why diabetics have a very high risk of arterial disease, because their average blood sugar is running high all the time.
Well, I just want to add something to that, because I was a competitive triathlete, so a very keen cyclist, and we were brought up on the mantra, and I'm sure you know what I'm about to say, high carbs are good. You have to load up on carbs before your training, before a competition. And I mean, there's even, I heard something that I've got it on my YouTube about this was all a bit of a myth, actually, apart from the fact that when you're dosing up on high carbs, of course, your body's turning those carbs into sugar. And so you're ripping apart your arteries by doing high intensive work on on a high carb diet, right?
Of course, in that high intensive work, your blood pressure is probably going to be high too. And especially when you're competing, your blood pressure is going to be high. I'm going
Wow.
to tell you a story now, and I love
Yes.
stories. And this pertains to the 1991 Gulf War. Frontline troops were told, we can't guarantee to support you for 5 days. So when you go out fighting, you've got to carry everything you need for 5 days. Now, if you are a soldier in the front line, the last thing you want to do is run out of ammunition. So these soldiers carried ammunition at the expense of food. By day 3, 4, and 5, they were hungry. The army runs on sugars and carbs. They were hypoglycemic. And all the deaths from friendly fire occurred from those hypoglycemic soldiers who had low blood sugar and they made bad decisions. So Dr. Kieran Clark, who's a researcher at Oxford University, was commissioned by the United States Army. What's the best fuel for these frontline soldiers to be carrying? So it's, which will ensure good energy delivery, but not too heavy to carry. And to cut a very long story short, she came up with beta-hydroxybutyric acid. Now, beta-hydroxybutyric acid is the ketones that we get when we are in fat burning mode. So she isolated beta-hydroxybutyric acid and she tested it on elite athletes, the Olympic triathletes, runners, cyclists, and these top athletes are extraordinarily motivated. They push themselves to their limits. And what was so interesting is when she gave them, it was 80 mils 3 times a day. Apparently it tasted disgusting. 80 mils 3 times a day. They all improved their performance, sometimes up between 7 and 15%. Many of them improved their personal bests. So what this tells us is that the best fuel for endurance work is actually ketones.
Huh.
There's a guy called Mark, oh gosh, it won't come to his head. It's coming to my head in a moment, who is an American runner, who is a keto adapted athlete. And he holds the record for the furthest distance run in 24 hours. He ran 172 miles.
Wow.
And he had no food during that time. Yes, he needed electrolytes, he needed water, but he was running on ketones. And, so we can fuel our body from the fat sources that we have within us. And that is the preferred fuel. You don't spike your blood sugar. You certainly don't damage your arteries. And it's the preferred source of energy. Now, the endurance runners who are running on sugars and carbohydrates, if they don't eat, they hit a wall at 17 or 18 miles. And because they run out of fuel, they have to eat regularly. Now, primitive man was an endurance hunter. He ran down, or she ran down the prey. They couldn't stop and have a snack halfway along. That would have been the end of their hunt. They were in ketosis. So for endurance athletes, you function best running in ketosis. Yes, for the power athletes, I would, if I had a sprinter or a weightlifter or a high jumper, I would train them on a ketogenic diet and then maybe carb load before a competition to give them that extra zip. But certainly that massive carb loading is bad news for arteries, combined with the high blood pressure. No wonder it damages arteries. And I see some of those top athletes, they might be fit, but they're not healthy. And you, Mark, are a wonderful example of that. Sorry about
that. Thank you. Well, interesting enough, I mean, I have switched my diet since my heart attacks to very much low carb, high fat. We'll talk a little bit more about ketosis, but it's also very interesting. Whereas before I used to, do the classic bowls of pasta before going out for a ride, and but now I'm not at the same level, obviously, because I have had some damage on my heart, but nevertheless I can ride quite effectively on an omelette for breakfast, or even before breakfast, before having anything, because my body has taken that transition to burning fats rather than burning carbs. And I wanted to add that it's a very interesting evolutionary thing as well. Maybe not that many people know it, but we used to succeed with our prey because we were able to as you say, endurance chased them for a long, long time, and many animals could not sweat. So we were running through the jungle, sweating on in ketosis, like you say, and like dogs, lions, whatever mammals, they can only sweat through their paws or their tongues and things like this. And so eventually they would be exhausted from running for so long, and that's when we'd nab them. So it's yeah, I'm completely into the whole paleo sort of thing, and ketosis as well. And let's just talk a little bit more about ketosis before we're moving on. One of the things I'm going to mention, and it'd be no surprise to you, is the effectiveness of a sardine diet, and in as a way of fasting with but being still able to eat. I'm sure you're pretty familiar with this now. It was quite a thing to trend recently.
Well, I mean, that's the next step. Again, fasting or time restricted eating is evolutionary correct. Did primitive man get 3 meals a day? I don't think so. He fasted and he feasted. So we should mimic that. And time restricted eating is vital for normal physiology. And the reason for that is after 16 hours of fasting, that switches on autophagy or autophagy or self-eating. And it's the equivalent of a spring clean. So we're constantly damaging ourselves through normal metabolism. We're constantly producing cancer cells just as a result of normal metabolism. In fact, we produce about 10,000 DNA mutations every second just from normal metabolism. And that produces free radicals, which are unstable. They damage the body, and during autophagy, we mop up. The immune system goes around and mops up all those damaged proteins, those damaged molecules, and gives it a good clean. So fasting is very helpful for good health. We damage ourselves by day, and we heal and repair by night, and autophagy is an essential part of that. So I'm very happy to hear that you do time restricted eating. That will be very helpful. And some people do longer fasts, and that's fine too. What I tend to do is I time restrict eat, have all my food within a 6-hour window. Once a week, I just have 1 meal a day, and then every 3 months, I do a 3-day fast. Now, when you are in ketosis, it's easy. I might feel a bit, I feel like something to eat. But if I ask myself, is the brain working well? Guess what? Yes, it is. Is the body working well? Guess what? It is. Now, the point about the sardines is that satisfies our protein appetite, because we crave food for many reasons, but one is we have a protein appetite. We have to eat a certain amount of protein every day to be well. We can't store protein in the body. Now, if you give people a high protein diet, it actually switches off their hunger. It's called protein leverage, and they're fascinating experiments which have been done on insects, small mammals, larger mammals. If you feed them a normal protein diet, they eat a normal amount of calories. If you feed them a low protein diet, they go on eating until they satisfy their protein requirement and end up overeating and getting fat. But by contrast, if you give them a high protein diet, it satisfies their protein appetite. They eat less and they tend to lose weight. So the sardine diet is a way of satisfying the appetite without spiking your blood sugar, making it easier to fast and, if necessary, lose weight. So I get it, and that was, of course, why the Atkins diet was so popular. Again, it was a ketogenic diet, but it was high protein. The appetite was satisfied, and people lost weight. And guess what? That is a lot safer than those wretched, Ozempic and Mounjaro drugs, which are absolutely, they work in the short term, but as soon as you stop them, the weight goes back on again, and they mess up the metabolism. Something awful. They are an absolute disaster, and we will see. I confidently predict we will see deaths from people taking those drugs.
I absolutely agree, but that's a particular rabbit hole I don't want to go down now. I will just say one thing, that the thing is that it's easy to get people on Ozempic, but there's very few protocols to get people safely off. And that's the trouble. And actually, I was going to go back to the hunger issue, because I was talking to a friend of mine. He's recently been told type 2 diabetic. It was never a surprise to me, given the size of him and his lifestyle. But I was suggesting to him that he should do the sardine diet or something similar. And then he said to me, yeah, but Mark, but after every few hours, my tummy rumbles and I can't resist it. And I'm like, well, your tummy rumbling is actually the start of your stomach cleaning itself. So it shouldn't be considered a bad thing. It should be considered a good thing, like you, as you say. And there's one other thing that you mentioned there, which I'm also very keen on, and we'll talk a lot more about this, or certainly in the series we'll be talking a lot more about this, and that's how important sleep is. Because the thing that I've learned, or the biggest thing that I've learned from the last 5 years or so, is that sleep is not rest time, sleep is healing time. Sleep is the time your body has to, as you say, to clean itself out and to heal. And I strongly believe, and I hope you back me up on this, that your body will heal itself if you give it the right ingredients and the right conditions.
Absolutely. Totally agree, totally concur. Sleep is absolutely vital. In fact, there is no life form that doesn't sleep, that doesn't shut down its biochemistry for that business of healing and repair. One thing that's often intrigued me is how do sea mammals sleep? Because, if a dolphin went to sleep, it would drown. And what they do is they shut down one half of their brain, and then they shut down the other half of their brain, so they still sleep without drowning. I think
many people like that, Dr. Sarah, who seem to be shutting down as parts of their brain and at different times of the day. But the other thing, so sleep is great, and I know the other topic that we can both talk about and get quite excited about, and one of the other things that I've really learned in my journey, so to speak, or our journey, is that water plays such an important role in the healing of the body and generally in the function of the body. And one thing as well that I've learned, and I would like to impress upon the listeners, water is not water. Water is not created equal. And no matter how expensive that water is in that nice plastic bottle or even glass bottle, water doesn't like to survive in those sort of conditions. And I think you know where I'm going with this. I'm going to talk about, I want you to talk a little bit about easy water and how the body likes to how the body uses the water in this kind of gel sort of state.
Okay.
Well,
yeah, you're absolutely right. Water is vital to our body, and if you tot up all the molecules in every single molecule in the body, we are 99% water molecules. There's an awful lot of it. And water we know exists in three forms: as a solid, which we call ice, as a liquid, which we drink, and as a gas. But against the surface, against the cell membrane, against a protein, against the mitochondrial membrane, against the lining of the blood vessels, against any surface in the body, it organizes itself into a hexagonal honeycomb-like structure, which has structure. It has solidity about it. And if you tot up all the charges involved in creating that honeycomb structure, it doesn't add up. You find there are too many protons. And so what that means is that this honeycomb structure is a very tight structure. The protons are excluded, leaving behind electrons. So what this means in practice is every surface in the body is negatively charged. And just like the maglev railways in China, which are run in a frictionless way, all surfaces in the body move in a frictionless way. And water holds molecules that generate energy in just the right three-dimensional position for efficient energy generation. So having good quality exclusion zone water, as it's called, or fourth phase water, as it's also called, is essential for normal physiology. And I think of this in terms of friction. Having good quality exclusion zone water reduces the friction in the system at all levels. It reduces the mechanical friction. So, I can move my arms around like that, and then it's not like bits of sandpaper scrunching across each other. It's the exclusion zone water that allows that to happen. And that, of course, explains why athletes have to warm up in order to function at peak performance, because heat is essential for good quality exclusion zone water. It also explains why why mitochondria can work efficiently, because the enzymes responsible for energy generation have to be in a very precise three-dimensional configuration to function normally. And by precise, I mean within an angstrom of accuracy, which is the width of an atom. and exclusion zone water allows that to happen. So it's essential for reducing mechanical friction, for reducing biochemical friction, for reducing immunological friction, and probably much more. So the question is, what do we need for good quality exclusion zone water? Well, obviously we need clean water. That's a give. We need fat, because we need good quality membranes to hold that EZ water in precisely the right three-dimensional shape. We need heat, and the body normal body core temperature should lie between 36.9 and 37.4 degrees centigrade. Many people run cold because they have poor mitochondrial function, underactive thyroid, wrong fuel in the tank or whatever. And there are some things which massively improve the quality of exclusion zone water. And the two top of the pops are magnesium and sulfate. And guess what? We are all deficient in magnesium and we are all deficient in sulfate. So, and to absorb magnesium, we need vitamin D, back to sunshine. And sulfate, we can get sulfate from Epsom salt baths. But one of my favourite multitasking tools is MSM, methyl sulfonyl methane. And it has a multiplicity of beneficial actions. Aside from improving the quality of exclusion zone water, it's good for detoxing heavy metals. We know it's protective against cancer. It's a good antioxidant. It's essential raw material for healing and repair our gut, our connective tissues, and much more. So, as well as being protective against heart disease. So it's a great multitasking tool that arguably we should all take. Of course, the best way to get sulfur group is to eat meat. A meat-heavy diet. Meat, fish and eggs are rich in sulfate. And this is one of the mechanisms by which a carnivore diet is often very helpful for people with any number of pathologies. It's a great starting point to prevent and reverse disease. So yes, exclusion zone water is essential. And my guess, and this is only a guess, but it is biologically plausible, that inflammation and exclusion zone water are the same thing. Because inflammation, I think, represents immunological friction in the system. And where there's inflammation, we know there is damage to tissues. Inflammation drives pathologies from cancer, heart disease, and dementia. Now, I've just put a 3-hour lecture into 5 minutes, so you might find some holes in my argument.
A bit because we're pulling together all these little dots and we're creating this wonderful picture, and I'm so excited about this. You can't believe, actually. But I just want to quickly swing back to we've closed the circle a little bit, because you talked about fourth phase water, easy water, and how it carries a negative charge. And we talked right at the beginning about the mechanism of clotting, and that's where the red blood cells come together and form a clump.
And that occurs when you lose exclusion zone water.
And that's what I was about to say. The best way that you can prevent that, or one of the ways physically or electromechanically, however you call it, is to have your endothelium layer slightly negative and your red blood cells slightly negative, and then they will repel each other, and then that problem is...
But there's a balance to be struck here, because if the lining of the artery is damaged, then it must be repaired as a matter of urgency. Because if the lining of that artery is damaged and the black blood vessel leaks, then you have a hemorrhage and you bleed to death very quickly. Right. So there is a balancing act to be had here. Yes, we need exclusion zone water for frictionless movement of blood. But, when the blood vessel is damaged, then the healing repair process needs to swing into action. And that's when we need platelets, we need fibrinogen to plug that hole before it leaks. Right. And the whole business of clotting is a very fine business. I mean, one of my favourite vitamins is vitamin K. Vitamin K has the very desirable property. It lines blood vessels. Now, when the blood vessel is intact, it inhibits clotting. But when the blood vessel is broken, it promotes it. And of course, that's a very desirable state of affairs. So vitamin K is important. And guess what? We're all deficient. How do we know we're all deficient? Pregnant mums are deficient. Their babies are deficient. And all babies have to be injected with vitamin K at the moment of birth to prevent hemorrhagic disease of the newborn. So we should get vitamin K from well, a high meat diet, of course, a carnivore diet gives us lots of vitamin K. A healthy microbiome will synthesize vitamin K. But the fact of the matter is, deficiency is very common.
Okay, I'm getting too excited, so I'm going to calm down. But okay, so I would consider myself something of a carnivore, high protein diet, but I have to be fair that I have come across people with excellent blood work who are vegetarians, and I always say, you know, diet is an individual thing, and if they're happy with that, then they're happy with that. You and I know as well that there need to be some other supplements to have the ideal sort of amino acid balance.
Well, you say excellent blood work, but the awful thing is the blood work that's done is not looking for true pathology, and is not looking at cause. For example, it doesn't measure the quality of exclusion zone water. For example, vitamin K levels are never looked at. For example, a serum magnesium is not a good reflection of magnesium stores. Sulfate is never measured. So all these things which we know are vital for protecting us from arterial damage, don't appear in normal blood work, as it's called. And the cardiologists, as you know, tend to concentrate on cholesterol, which, as I say, is an innocent bystander. It does not cause arterial disease.
Dr. Sarah Myhill, we've been going for half an hour already. I've completely lost track of the time. Before we finish, though, and first of all, tell everyone where they can find you. I know you have some wonderful supplements. You mentioned them already. I know you're not the classic sort of. This is why I mentioned. I suggested this supplement, and by the way, you can buy it from me, because actually I couldn't, even though I tried.
Well, and I'm not in, and I'm not in the business of selling supplements. I'm in the business of disseminating information, and I've got a website where there's lots of information on there. I would love to put all my books on the website, but my publisher would sack me if I did that. But so there's some useful information, in the books, and I'm very happy to send you my. What I'll do, I send you my cardiology chapter, and you're welcome to send that round your members. But it's all about asking the question why, and going back to root causes. And if in any doubt, think evolution. Go back to evolutionary biology. I've jumped around horribly, and this is partly my fault. I think what we need to do maybe is, if we're having half-hour sessions, let's do a half an hour on diet and blood sugar control, half an hour on cholesterol, half an hour on homocysteine, half an hour on poisoning and detoxification. These are all lectures that normally take 3 hours, but I'll try and boil them down. But otherwise, we're going to jump around people.
What you wish for, Dr. Sarah, because I could talk to you in a series of episodes for the rest of the year. But one thing to close this one off, and this was the bombshell that I teased at the beginning of the episode, and you mentioned it already. I had my heart attack during a competition on a very hot day, running at very near my peak heart rate for an hour and a half. And I had a sudden cardiac arrest shortly before the finish line. And you suggested to me the other day what the probable cause was. And you've mentioned it already, but I want you to just hit us with it now.
Well, the clue from this came from the Great Northern Run, which is about 2007 or something like that, which was a half marathon, 13,000 competitors. 4 people dropped dead. Now, when it came to post-mortem, they were. Do you know what the diagnosis was? And that's, it's shameful. The diagnosis was sudden adult death syndrome. I mean, you couldn't make it up, could you? But we have to think. Now, I don't know what they died of, but we have to think, what is a biologically plausible mechanism? Now, for the heart to contract, it needs calcium. For the heart to relax, it needs magnesium. Magnesium deficiency, as we've touched upon, is extremely common. Now, when you run, you sweat. And when you sweat is comprised of everything that's in the bloodstream minus the solid bits. So you don't sweat red cells, white cells, and proteins and platelets and fibrin, but you do sweat electrolytes. And when I say electrolytes, we're not just talking sodium and potassium. We're talking calcium, magnesium, zinc, copper, selenium, chromium, molybdenum, the whole shooting match. Now, this was a very hot day. People were sweating a lot and losing, but in losing a lot of sweat, they then they would have dropped their serum magnesium. And my guess is that in dropping their magnesium, they had enough calcium to contract, but not enough magnesium to relax. And their hearts stopped in systole. They had cardiac arrests, and they didn't have enough magnesium for their heart to relax again. So my guess is that the cause of your cardiac arrest was acute magnesium deficiency. And what this means is that when athletes hydrate, they must hydrate with all the electrolytes, not just sodium and potassium. And I have got one preparation called Sunshine Salt, which has got all the electrolytes, but you need extra magnesium. And the more you run, the more magnesium you should have. And for magnesium to be absorbed, you need vitamin D. And I recommend 10,000 international units daily. That is the NOEL, the No Observed Adverse Effects limit. It's equivalent to about half an hour of sunshine. Guess how much sunshine primitive man got? About 12 hours of sunshine. It is impossible to overdose on 10,000 IU of vitamin D, but it's absolutely essential we all take that, especially in the winter when there's no sunshine.
And in fact, we can finish on that bombshell, but I know also that some doctors get a bit scared about prescribing that amount of vitamin D, but I also know that was some test that went wrong in the 60s where one person died, and then since then vitamin D has become, oh no, you mustn't have too much of that. But
that's another big subject. But the fact is, 10,000 is only, I say, half an hour of sunshine. It's a small dose, and there's a wonderful doctor in Brazil called Dr Coimbra who often uses 50 or 60 or 70,000 IU to treat inflammatory conditions. At that dose, you have to keep an eye on the serum calcium. But when used properly, less than 1% of participants run into problems with calcium. That is the only toxicity of vitamin D. It's gloriously safe stuff. It's one of the most important anti-inflammatories in the body, and we are all deficient.
Dr. Sarah Myhill, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you for the last half an hour. I look forward to catching up with you very soon again.